Welcome to this conversation with Mayor Roger Reinert. I'm Grell, and the mayor is here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
We wanted to start out today, Roger, just kind of encapsulating a little bit your first year in office. What stands out to you about that first year, maybe that really made an impression on you?
It's hard. I mean, not really at a top level. It was a really, really difficult year. And, you know, I think if you talk to anyone who comes into the role, they will share the same thing. Other mayors have shared with me that the first year and a half, I know Mayor Ness told me it was about the first 2.5 years for him were really challenging. And I think, you know, anyone who started a new job knows you begin with the, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And it doesn't matter how much training or how much prep, and certainly I've been around the city and had relevant experience, but until you step in the role, you don't know. And then there's the, you know, the significant changes in our leadership team. So we lost a lot of institutional knowledge during that transition. That took us months to get kind of caught back up on. You know, and then there's the issues you want to work on because you talked about them for almost a full year on the campaign trail. And then the issues that you don't know are coming that are surprises that, you know, you're trying to manage on top of all of that. So, you know, number one, I just think just how difficult it was. And, you know, and we were making some changes in direction of the city organization. We were really trying to realign to our core city service priorities. And I wrote a commentary for one of our local newspapers where I said, you know, I really saw the three different kinds of change. One was, I don't like the change, and I'm going to let you know that. Two was, I voted for change, but this wasn't the change I thought I was voting for, so I'm going to let you know that. And then three was, you know, I think things are going in a good direction, and I'm happy you're doing a good job, but I'm probably not going to say that unless I run into you in the grocery store. So all those things kind of put together, I think, were a real learning experience for me.
Now, you mentioned that you had prior experience. Obviously, you had been a Duluth City Councilor,
right,
and then served several years in the legislature, both
right,
in the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
How has that helped you kind of transition to this position and helped you kind of know the lay of the land?
Well, I think one, just general knowledge of the differentiation between what does a city do, what is local government's kind of job description versus county versus state versus federal. And I think, you know, equally helpful is I've spent a lot of years in the classroom teaching about state and local government. And so the idea that we have a federal system with these different levels of government, and each of them have different lanes and priorities. And frankly, I think as we see changes happening in DC with a new presidential administration, we're going to again see some of the pressure about things that are really federal issues trying to be brought back to the local level because they may or may not be getting the traction folks hope to see happen out there. But that doesn't change the reality that local government really is about some very basic things. You know, our core city services around streets and utilities and public safety, library and parks and local economic development. So just having that framework, I think, has been helpful because, you know, we get, and, you know, we can talk a little bit about this too, like everyone thinks every issue in Duluth is I like to say capital C, meaning our organization, City of Duluth issue. In reality, most of them aren't. In many, we might be a partner, but we're not the primary driver. But we are definitely the level of government that people know. They know where City Hall is. They know who the mayor is. They know how to get a hold of the mayor. And so, you know, I spend half my time saying that's not actually a great example is at Christmas, people were frustrated that the Christmas ornaments weren't on Superior Street. And so I heard a lot about that. And I'm like, it's not actually a City of Duluth thing. That's a different organization who has historically done that and has made a decision to not do that this year. But people don't know that, so it ends up being a city conversation. But I think that past experience was definitely helpful. I think helpful for me in the role as mayor has also been my military service, where I've had the opportunity to be a leader of different size teams. Now, nothing the size and scale of 900 employees at City Hall, but just that structure. And, you know, one of the lessons learned during the first year was to sort of follow the chain of command, because people will come to the mayor with issues, and whenever I would skip the chain and go down to where I think that issue lived and needed to be resolved, it just was confusing for staff and usually made things more difficult and took longer to respond and get to it. So feel fortunate that I think a variety of experiences that I had before I became mayor have been helpful.
You mentioned, people not necessarily knowing the difference between state government, federal government, city government. I saw that in my career in the news media, often a lot of confusion. It's maybe early to know, but you mentioned the new administration. How could some federal changes perhaps affect the city of Duluth?
Well, I mean, we were recording the end of January. We've seen executive orders, multiple ones a day, daily, and we in real time are trying to figure out what does that mean for us at the city. Things like funding. A great example is we were down last week at the Capitol talking about our bonding priorities for the 2025 legislative session. And, we started the day with, hey, we think we fully funded the aerial lift bridge, which is a $20 million project that must happen because the road deck is in really precarious condition. To about 2 hours into our meetings, we were like, we think we need 17 million from the state because of a new executive order too. By the end of the day, we're cautiously optimistic that the order wasn't meant to cover the, so, in real time, I think like many in the public, we're trying to understand what do these changes mean, but certainly President Trump is a disruptive factor within the federal government. That was something that we saw on the campaign trail. It's something that he and his administration are pointing to as one of the reasons that he was elected, and we're seeing leaders put in that are intended to be disruptors as well. And I think challenging at the local level is I want government to not make the news. I want our core city services to just work and work well. And those two things are certainly going to be in tension, and I think at times perhaps in conflict as we try to really continue to focus on our core city services.
So speaking of those core city services, looking back at the challenges from 2024, you have kind of the 5 big issues.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we came into office with these 5 big issues, things that we had talked about on the campaign trail that I wanted to make sure that we took active steps towards. And those were affordable property taxes, housing across all income levels, growing our commercial tax base, focusing on downtown, and then ever persistent streets and utilities during this first year. So and I spoke to all those things during my first State of the City. Within each of those areas, I'm proud that we have made significant tangible steps forward. Within all those areas, we still certainly have work to do, and some of them more so than others. But from things like the significant news around the Sofidel investment in the paper plant, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, going from 80 to nearly 300 employees. And I think importantly, giving that facility decades of life to come because of the finished product being made on site that will then be warehoused and distributed. I like to say also highlights our real competitive advantage as a transportation hub, which post-COVID logistics matters. Start on everything from the Lakeview 333 project downtown to the Ordine project to the breaking ground on the Incline Village project. Our most recent council meeting, we are moving forward on the development of 15 single-family homes in Woodland, so that housing at all income levels. Because one of the things that the data tells us so clearly is we're not doing enough in the mid-market and frankly even the upper end of the housing market. So what we're seeing is folks who have the resources can and are overpaying for what we do have, and that puts significant downward pressure on our housing stock and creates an ever-growing pool of people who can't afford a home in their own community. So we have to be, and it's a model we saw Minneapolis be really proactive about, building at all levels and all types to really put more inventory on the market. And nationally, they were one of the communities who saw the least percentage growth in both rental prices as well as for sale prices. So we talk to the public a lot about the age of our infrastructure, our pipes underneath the ground, water and sewer, and to a lesser degree natural gas are pushing the century mark. And we saw that with a major water main collapse out in West Duluth that took out 4 lanes of Grand Avenue. We saw it just a week ago at Masaba with another water main collapse. The age of our infrastructure, when it's designed to live about 50 or 60 years, is significant, and we have to be aggressive about that. The idea that we need to do about 15 miles of street every year, year after year, so that we can refresh the system on the 30-year mark, I think was a big thing coming out of that first year. I'm really proud that from the affordable taxes as well as the commercial tax base growth side, we were able to do a 0% levy for the first time in a decade. That's reflective of both of those priorities. And maybe I'll just wrap up that question by saying, as we move into the second year, those 5 things really kind of collapse into 3. They really are about effective and efficient core city services at a tax rate our homeowners and businesses can afford, housing at all income levels if we want to reach that 90,000 population mark, and then growing that commercial tax base, because we really did see in Minnesota, where commercial pays roughly 2/3 of the bill to 1/3 residential, that when we do grow the business sector of our community, we can afford those core city services without having to ask for a lot more from our residential homeowners.
Now, you hit on something in that answer that I think is really interesting for viewers, and that is, we know that Duluth is a world port, but we don't often understand what that means. I mean, we literally have access to the world with our port. Yeah. How does that play into kind of your plan and your vision as a city leader? I mean,
a great question, and I'll come back again just to highlight again, because we don't talk about it enough, the logistics connections that we have. We're the only community in Minnesota that has an airport, freeway, rail, and a port, a real port. Other communities say they have the port, like the Port of St. Paul. It's an economic development area. We have the largest port by tonnage on the Great Lakes, a top 10 port in the entire country, including East and West Coast, right here in Duluth, and that's significant. And what is so powerful for us as we lean into the next chapter of economic development, not just for our community, but state and country, is the connections between all those transportation systems. So again, Sofidel is such a great example, and to a lesser degree, just because it's a smaller project, the Amazon distribution warehouse, also in West Duluth, is about having those things here and being able to send them everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, as Sofidel looked to make their significant investment, it was about having a node in the upper Midwest where they could not only make, and again, significant is make finished products like tissue and toilet paper and paper towels, warehouse them here in Duluth, and then ship them throughout the other upper Midwest, because we have both port and rail, that intermodal connections. And of course, our aviation industry depends on not just having the airport to bring in materials and deliver finished products, but also the rail and the freeway and the port to bring in some of the materials they need as well. So, as we think of our industries around shipping and aviation and manufacturing, having those transportation connections really positions us well. And I would also note, and we don't talk about this nearly as much, a redundant and reliable power grid, as well as, and this is something we should love as Northlanders, cold temperatures. There are so many things now happening in the technology sector where having a cooler environment reduces the cost because of the heating of all of the systems that are involved, that having a cold environment that doesn't have tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes with reliable power and transportation connections positions us uniquely within our national economy.
Yeah, I agree. I've always thought of that. You look at Duluth and it really is immune to some of those natural disasters. I guess the worst thing that could happen to us is a big blizzard.
Yeah, right. But we know how to deal with snow. Well, we've forgotten a little bit. But
I wanted to bring that up because this is the second straight, you've kind of been lucky in office, the second straight kind of low snow winter. Now we're taping this on January 29th, so we still could get a lot of snow. Yeah. But up to this point, it's been a little bit easier on the city budget again, and that's got to be helpful.
For sure. No, and I think, Definitely what we saw last winter, a remarkably low snow winter. Not only, people's happiness with plowing, of course. I joked for about the first 3 or 4 months in office that I promised you we'd do a better job plowing, and we're delivering on that promise. But not only the ability of our crews to sort of have a reasonable workload, that's definitely helpful, but also the saving on money, but also having their time available in the summer to do street repairs. So, yes, we had a lighter snow plow last winter, but what folks saw, and I heard a lot about, was how much street repair we were able to do this summer. Of course, the new construction and resurfacing that's programmed in from our general fund and our sales tax dollars, but also just our street crews and our summer temp help getting out and getting after potholes and crack sealing. Mm-hmm. I had a chance to go out with one of our crews and actually do some crack sealing. And one thing I learned from our staff was when we don't have the staff capacity and time to do preventative maintenance like crack sealing, water becomes our enemy, right? It gets in, it expands, it lifts up, and then next winter we're plowing up chunks of asphalt because they've been dislodged from their subsurface. So that was actually the really big thing I saw from the lighter snow load last winter. Now this year we're getting a little bit more snow. It's a little bit more evenly paced, but it was funny to see the Gulf Coast in New Orleans get more snow in one storm than we've seen in a major storm this winter. So like you said, we still have winter to go, but it's been, and I know we have a ton of winter enthusiasts and we have certainly winter economies that need that snow, but it's been good to get a little bit more, but in reasonable amounts that we can sort of all tolerate as residents and also handle from a snow removal standpoint.
Now, looking ahead at 2025, what are some of the themes and goals that you're seeing as we get this year underway?
Yeah, I think the 3 that we touched on, the 5 big issues, like I said, really are 3, and I'll talk about those in the State of the City, which, by the way, will this year, I think, be late March. I'm really trying to get that realigned with the City Council's inaugural meeting of the year. We used to do a really nice pomp and circumstance first City Council meeting of the year, the new president and the state of the city. And a few years ago, we got away from that, and I want to get realigned. But it's going to take us a minute to get there. But, those 3 issues around effective and efficient core city services at a tax rate we can afford and sustain. We need to acknowledge that tax pressure on our homeowners and our businesses is a real thing. So I'll be much more involved much earlier in our city budget process this year after having gone through it once and kind of knowing now what I know. And then secondly, we have to continue to make housing at all income levels a priority because that goal of reaching 90,000 people by 2030 is a real and is an attainable goal, but we will not get there unless we create the housing opportunities for people to actually live in our community. And then thirdly, growing that commercial tax base, as we've talked about. An overarching theme that I will talk about every chance I get over this coming year also is regional. One of the things that I don't think folks may not know, but don't think enough about is 2/3 of the St. Louis County population, 2/3, lives in Duluth or a community with whom we share a border. Mm-hmm. So this little corner of the county is 2/3 of the county's population. And you look at many of the city programs and services that were developed in the 1950s and 60s were not built on that model. They were built on a model of Duluth as a regional center at that time, the 3rd largest city in the state, with really nothing immediately around us. And we fast forward and that has just dramatically changed. So, one of my goals this year is to get our near neighbor mayors together and talk about where are the opportunities for us to partner. Can we do a regional library? Can we do a regional park system? Should we be doing regional economic development instead of city by city? When we think about sports venues, athletic venues, can we look at that regionally instead of everybody trying to build their ice sheets and everybody trying to build the same amenities when the reality is we're no more than 10 miles away from each other. So I think we just have to have those conversations in order to meet the expectations our residents have, as well as the financial constraints that we all have as local units of government. So.
You talked about, partnerships with local communities, but there's also a very big partnership with the county.
Sure. Yeah.
That really shows itself in something as simple as plowing the roads.
Yeah.
Some people in the city live on a county road, and the
Yeah.
county plows their road.
Yeah.
And vice versa in some
Yeah.
cases. Just expound on that.
Well, I think it's a great question, Greg, and I think it's another great opportunity for us. We definitely tried to lean more into what is the city and county relationship, knowing that we're a sizable portion of the county's population, and also a sizable portion of the county's tax base. And I think highlighted by basic services like you just mentioned, I literally had a phone call yesterday with someone who had a concern about Arrowhead and Rice Lake Road. I'm like, both county roads. So I can pass that along, but more effective if you just call your county commissioner. But again, it kind of highlighting that everybody thinks everything is the city of Duluth. But also, some more serious issues. As we talk about downtown Duluth and problems that we're facing there, from substance use and mental health and crime and graffiti and some of the issues that we've seen. And frankly, a year later have not gotten better despite them being a real priority for me. They require more than the city of Duluth. I found myself saying a lot last year, we don't do health and human services. I mean, it's not a city service. We don't have one social worker in our 900 employees because it's just not something a city does. But the county does and the state does. So, we have to have in those levels of government better partnerships around these really significant issues, because the reality is we all need to care about downtown Duluth. We as the city, the county does, the state does, our business community, our downtown Duluth organization, our faith leaders, our civic organizations, our outreach providers, because we need downtown Duluth to thrive again, and I think that future is around residential. We have great housing potential in downtown Duluth, and we have people who want that living experience, but we need a cleaner, safer environment for folks that are there now and for the folks that we want to have come down the road. And the city alone cannot do that. It is just literally impossible given staff and financial constraints. But I do believe that effective partnerships with organizations like St. Louis County, state of Minnesota, and others, we can get there.
All right, you're listening to a conversation with Mayor Roger Reinert. And Mayor Reinert, as we know, there's kind of some commotion down at the state legislature. You're a former state lawmaker. You talked about earlier in this conversation how the federal government affects the state. Well, local government aid is a big part of the city's budget. And right now, who is really in charge down at the legislature? Not really sure. Does that make your life a little difficult? I
mean, certainly to a degree. And I think the understanding both sides of the argument in the House right now, and appreciative of both parties' positions, but the House not convening now going on 3 weeks is really challenging. Having been there for 3 terms, know that time is precious. It's a part-time legislature. They have a definite adjournment date. So the loss of 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks is a real chunk of time. I think I'm still hopeful for this session because we really were realistic about our legislative agenda list. We're talking about the aerial lift bridge project, we're talking about the water plant improvements, and we're talking about the seawall work necessary to develop Lot D, the lot immediately adjacent to Pier B. We are talking about local government aid, and we're talking about our 1% sales tax. And then we're talking about a potential tax credit to help convert commercial to residential downtown. But, to your question, and I don't know that everyone listening may have heard of LGA, but not know exactly what that is. So LGA, local government aid, is a formula that was developed by the state of Minnesota decades ago. If you're a sports fan, think of revenue sharing, right? The big teams help share with the smaller teams. In Minnesota, we pool resources through the state and then send it back out based on things like age of housing or age of infrastructure. From a regional center standpoint, something we call overburden. What are the services that a regional center provides one city provides that really serve an entire region. And that is a significant portion of our revenue. So when we look at the city of Duluth's revenue, LGA is a third. It's our single largest source of revenue. So money from the state is a third of our revenue side, followed by property tax, and then followed by our 1% sales tax that goes into our general fund. So something we're always working on. So I think to your question, Greg, what I'm most concerned about is, given the what likely will eventually be a tie on the House and a one-seat majority in the Senate, will the legislature be able to both do a budget this year, which it must do, the 2-year biennium required by the Constitution? It can't do these continuing resolutions like Congress does, and a bonding bill, which should have gotten done last year but wasn't, so now sits on the table also. Those are two pretty heavy lifts, and each week that goes by just makes that a little bit more tenuous. So but we were down last week. We had almost 15 meetings with legislative leaders and the governor's staff. Again, having, I think, a skinny priority list for this session is helpful, so I remain optimistic. And now that I've got that first difficult year behind me, I plan to spend a lot more time down there. I still have a lot of relationships with leadership, and I'm going to tell Duluth's story every chance I can. So.
Well, and you mentioned the Duluth aerial bridge and that it's in critical need of repair. I would think that the bridge is almost a state asset because it's so well known, and it's kind of the symbol of Duluth, obviously.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get tired of how often we see the aerial bridge when people
or when
talk
we get
about
bridged,
Duluth.
right?
Or when we get bridged.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you see people in the legislature realizing that is something that needs to be prioritized?
For sure, and I think it always helps, having been in those shoes is helpful, because I know how many things come at legislators, particularly leaders, who need to, much like a mayor in a city, a legislative leader has to think about the entire state. So, I'll be in talking about my list of projects, and then the mayor of Wadena is going to be in next talking about theirs, and, you have to be a little bit versed in all of that. But I do talk about the aerial lift bridge as not just a bridge. It is Minnesota's bridge. I mean, tell me of a more iconic bridge in the entire state of Minnesota. It's literally a tourist attraction in and of itself. So we do talk about that a little bit differently. Again, hopefully it's about a $20 million project. Absolutely must be done this year. We cannot push another year because we're getting into structural integrity issues. If we do have all of those pieces put together, that'll be good news, because that helps us lift the water plant higher up. We have an administrative order with the EPA about improvements there that total a little bit over $40 million. And coming back to something we discussed earlier, the water plant is a classic regional asset. It actually serves 135,000 folks in Duluth, Rice Lake, Hermantown, and Proctor. So we already do regional. And then thirdly would be those seawalls at the Lot D, so that we can get going on some residential retail, and also the Large Lakes Observatory for the University of Minnesota. Get the Large Lakes Observatory actually on the largest of the large lakes, get the Blue Heron Research Vessel parked right there. It just makes sense, but we can't have the land continuing to wash away before we start work. So.
Now, recent news in the city is there's been some administrative changes, and you have now a new chief administrative officer,
Yep.
Matt Stalings. Talk a little bit about Matt. He comes from St. Cloud, previous job.
Sure.
And must feel good now to have a permanent administrator.
Well, it feels good to be getting to the end of, and I think one thing that I found myself saying, or at least reminding folks, is the city of Duluth is not immune from the same employment pressures that everybody else is. I think as a community, we went through a long period of time where you were like, I'm just glad to have a job, and I'm not ever going to look, and I'm going to stay in this job for 40 years. I'm just going to kind of sit here and hope, No, that was because you're amazing.
It was a little over 30 years.
So, but it's not, that is not our employment market anymore. We are in the same post-COVID employment market as everybody else, and so we see the same turnover. Folks have lots of opportunities now, and so even as we are close to having our leadership team set, we know we have a key member of that who's taken another amazing opportunity, so we'll be looking to fill a position in the near horizon. But this is a really important role. And I think I would take just a minute to highlight because I've referenced it sort of a couple times. Folks think that the city is in charge of everything, and they think that the mayor personally is here making every decision on a daily basis, and that is not how this works. So, the mayor's job as an elected official is to really be externally facing and to be vision and direction. And I like to say that person may or may not come into office with any relevant experience or skill sets. It's a political position that's elected. The city administrator is a qualified professional with the background, experience, and training to be internally facing, to be responsible for the daily operations of the city and to implement the mayor's vision and direction. So I know a lot of folks don't know that the city administrator exists, but when you contact me with an issue, I immediately go to them, that person, and say, hey, can you look into this and help provide some resolution to that? Because like I said earlier, what I found right away was when I jumped that chain, it just made things messy and it was confusing for staff. So staff have managers and supervisors and directors in the city administrator. So to your question, Greg, we have nearly 900 employees. About 5 of those report directly to me as mayor. The other almost 900 indirectly or directly report to the city administrator. So by far the more important position within the City of Duluth organization. So really fortunate in my first year that Dave Montgomery came out of retirement. I knew I needed to make a change in that role as I took on the job of mayor. Here was somebody who had worked for both Mayor Larson and Mayor Ness, had years of experience. Dave is really, really sharp on financial stuff. That's his professional background. Did not need to do that. He was pretty happy in retirement, but was interested in helping me get off to a successful start. But came in with an understanding that we shared that he was only going to be there for about a year through that first year, the first budget. And so, as we've done with a number of key leadership roles, even though they're mayoral appointments, meaning that I can pick anybody I want as long as I can get 5 votes from the city council, that's not how we've done it. We've done job descriptions and postings and search committees and, taken the time, even in some cases where it was kind of painful because we really needed to get the position filled, but we wanted to do it right to find good people. And so one of the things I am, if you would ask me what I'm most proud of in the first year, it's something that nobody really talks about, and that's that to a person, I didn't know any of these key leadership role individuals a year ago. They weren't donors or campaign volunteers or activists. There wasn't a did you vote for me test. It was, are you the best professional we can find for this role? So I always say I'm hiring for the next mayor. I want people that are going to be here long term, and that's true with Matt as well. Matt comes to us with almost 30 years of local government experience. He started out life as an attorney, started working in a city attorney's office, then became a city attorney, so has that experience, and now for the last 10 years has been the city administrator in St. Cloud. And some things that were really, and we did do, again, a competitive search. We had a finalist pool that were all fantastic leaders. Some folks like key leaders already in our region. But what stood out about Matt to the search committee and then also to me as I interviewed him was certainly that background, that strong resume, coming from another regional center. I think about peers in our market space, if you will. St. Cloud is certainly one of them. And St. Cloud is a community that in 20 years has grown by almost a third in population, significant tax base growth, and also significant diversity within the community. A significant Hispanic population, significant East African population. All things, we want to be a diverse community. We want to grow our tax base. We want to grow our population. So all things that he's seen firsthand. Worked with a mayor, Mayor Dave Kleiss, who was mayor there for 20 years, who I have a lot of respect and admiration for. A mayor like myself who really wants to do nonpartisan work within this role. And then thirdly, and this really stood out to me in checking Matt's references and then frankly cold calling some people that, I wasn't given. Every single one talked about teamwork, talked about his, it's not about his ego or accomplishments, a really collaborative leader, and also the culture that had been built in St. Cloud. And when you think about wanting to bring a leader in that you hope is there long term, hopefully will be there longer than I am, and somebody you want to be invested in how the organization functions. One of the things that's a high priority for me in the City of Duluth organization is more collaboration, better teamwork, respect for our peers, and just a place that people love to work. And that's something I definitely heard over and over again about the City of St. Cloud. And so I'm really excited about Matt. And I will note, this was a significant career move for him. It would have been easy for him to say, I'm going to finish my career with St. Cloud. But he was looking for a challenge and kind of to take everything he has learned and take it up one notch to a bigger community, a bigger organization. And so I'm personally grateful that he was willing to do that, and I'm really excited about our partnership over the years to come.
And speaking of significant, it did require a fairly significant boost in the pay scale.
No.
Is that the price of doing business these days?
It really is, and I'm glad you asked that question because I've seen some of the conversation online about that. And I think, one, sometimes we can be a little bit small town, and I will just also say we make everything way too political. I know that Duluth loves politics, and we love to chat about everything, but some things are just daily operations, and we didn't do this without doing our homework. We, even before we posted the job, went and looked at what all the other regional centers were paying their city administrators, and we added in Bloomington and Brooklyn Park because they are comparable in population. And learned two things. Number one, we had the lowest paid city administrator of all of them, who also happened to have the most qualifications and some of the longest tenure in the role. So thank you, Dave, because we got a deal. And then number two, our administrator wasn't even the highest paid city employee. It was the police chief. And that's not appropriate within the organization. I think also important for the public to know this person, again, supervises almost 900 employees. And when you add in our utilities, the city of Duluth is a $500 million, with a B, a $500 million enterprise. This is a significant leadership role, not just for the city, but within the community and the region. So we then went, when we were down to our finalists, and checked on what salaries were anticipated to be in the next year, and Matt's is right in the mid-range, not top, not bottom, so that's appropriate, and frankly less than he would have made had he stayed at St. Cloud. So I continue to think that we're getting really good value for what the contract will be. And I will note that we had all 7 bargaining units up for negotiation this year. 6 are done, and fire is underway. That's the 7th one. At the end of that, every city employee but one will have gotten a raise. So, I think we are being competitive with salaries, but again, I'll come back to, we are in that hyper-competitive employment space. Like, it will be challenging for us on the budget side this year to figure out how to pay for all of that, but it is where we need to be in order to have the talent that we want for this organization.
You touched on a little bit in that answer about the way social media has framed a lot of city issues. Being a relatively recent Redditor now, I do more lurking than I do posting, but it is interesting to read some of the conversations around Duluth and many other things. But how is that? Or I think you just want to talk a little bit about that, right? Like what it's like to deal with it.
I've tried to address it a couple times, and I think it is a theme for this coming year because it's tied to this us making things too political. It actually is harmful to us as a community when others look at how we have our conversations. Again, I love that we're a big small town, but there's also a downside to being a big small town, and sometimes we're just a little small town minded about some things. And I used to really enjoy social media, and I try to be active in that space, especially with mayor socials. But, after having people go on my own socials and take things and try to use and make them political, like taking a vacation for the first time all year after we'd finally settled the budget and the levy, like here is the appropriate time to take a break after a really, really hard year. And then that became political. Like the mayor should never take a vacation. And it's just like, social media is great because we have a chance in real time to talk about things. But it's also one of the things I love that you're willing to come and do this. We cannot talk about anything meaningful in 90 seconds. And when everybody online gets to be an expert, when they comment or post, and then everybody who comments or posts and reply is also an expert, and we have these analytics that are meant to drive things to the top that just have engagement, there's not necessarily truth or fact to it, it does not help our public discourse. And at heart, I'm a civics teacher. So to the degree that I can use this role to encourage us to have thoughtful conversations about important issues and not just go back and forth online, I'm going to use that space. And so things like this, the more long form content, I think are really helpful. And I will note one encouraging trend that I've seen is that people are hungrier for the longer form content because they know that they're not getting everything out of little snippets, in 90 seconds or less. Now, we'll still stay active in that space because I've heard overwhelmingly that people appreciate using the Mayor Roger DLH socials to talk about the variety of things a mayor does. But it's also not enough space to really have a substantive conversation. But I do think that it's important for us to think about how we treat each other. We've seen all of the mental health implications to online, especially targeting of specific individuals, from teenagers to adults to suicides. Like this is a real thing. Yeah. And in our big small town, we're never more than 1 degree away from someone. Right. And what I've literally seen happen in this first year is somebody will say something really awful online, and then I'll have a personal interaction with them, and they'll either, I think, hope I didn't see that, or think that it somehow has nothing to do with our personal relationship. And of course it does. Like, we can't be disconnected from those things that we do and say in the virtual environment when we know we're going to interact and work with each other as I'd like to say IRL, in real life. So, I'm hopeful that we in Duluth, because we are a big small town, can do better with that. And I think we just need to talk about it.
The anonymity of social media tends to make people say things or write things that they would never say in public. Yeah, and even when your name is connected to it, somehow because it's online, it makes it less real.
But I mean, those comments do have real world implications, and we've seen all the data around what it does to online bullying and really negative, harmful comments have real life implications for individuals and their mental health, and we can do better.
Speaking of real life implications, last year you instituted a series of public safety initiatives. Talk a little bit about how that has progressed.
Sure.
And that did get a lot of attention at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important, in those conversations we had really focused around downtown and downtown public safety. There were a lot of pretty harsh comments and critiques. Fine. That is what that public space is for. But I'm glad for the question because we get to come now months later and show data that helps the public understand that what we said at the time is actually what happened. So, for instance, the public safety ordinances, which, just so everybody remembers, gave us misdemeanors, which we didn't have in our city code. It was either an administrative fine, sometimes pretty hefty, that oftentimes people couldn't afford to pay, or a felony. So, we had the instance of somebody who graffitied hundreds of items throughout the city, got administrative fines, didn't pay them, nothing happened. And then the result was aggregating a number of instances. So now this individual has a felony. There's got to be something in between. And so that's really what that work was about, around 10 different items where we see a lot of activity for both our life safety team within the fire department as well as our police team, folks that we ask to go out in the community and help enforce our community norms. So fast forward, 13 misdemeanors have been written over that time, and most of them actually ended up being dismissed because it gave an opportunity to work with individuals to find some other remedy to the behavior or the damage or the harm caused. And that's really what our public safety leaders were asking for. So, one of the things we heard at the time was hundreds of misdemeanors were going to be issued, go on people's records, incarcerate. That's not, our leaders at the time said that's not what will happen, and the data shows that that's not what happened. I think the other thing I'll highlight, because it was a little bit controversial, was the crisis response team that was working downtown through the Center for Human Development, and when we said, hey, we don't do health and human services, and we have to think about every dollar we spend, and how we prioritize that, took a lot of heat for that. And I said at the time, this really is about trying to find others to partner with us. Again, we are willing to be a partner on things. We care about downtown. It matters both in terms of the lived experience downtown, frankly, as well as our tax base downtown. But we cannot be the only and primary funder of things that are really health and human services. And again, at the time, took a lot of arrows, a lot of criticisms around that, but fast forward, it was exactly what we hoped. We were able to get both Aspirus and Essentia to be partners in that work over the next year. They both had staff that came to council meetings and talked about how helpful that proactive on the street connection was versus folks showing up in emergency rooms for high cost care. So first of all, I want to applaud them for being partners in that. Unfortunately on this, we weren't able to get the county engaged. We were hoping for a 4-way partnership around that work, but the city continues to be at the table, but that is the right model moving forward. Coming back to something we said earlier, the mental health and substance use and behavior challenges we have downtown are very complex, and they are far more than just the city of Duluth can tackle. If we want to make progress downtown that's caring for individuals that are struggling with some life circumstances, but also create the safe environment that is welcoming to folks living and working downtown now, but also to the folks we want living downtown, it's going to be all of those players we mentioned earlier, civic and faith and business and local, county and state government, and our nonprofit service providers all working together.
Keeping the conversation downtown for a bit, the downtown waterfront district has seen a fairly significant upgrade with the seawall behind the deck.
Yeah.
And I think
we don't say behind the deck though.
We don't.
Deck waterfront.
The deck waterfront. Okay, I got to get the terminology right. But anyway, I believe that project is nearly complete, and that's going to be a significant change. Yep. I mean, that is I know for me as a longtime resident, I love driving behind the deck, seeing the waterfront, stopping, walking on the boardwalk. Yeah. Now the cruise ships are going to be able to dock there. That's going to be a big change.
Yeah, and related to that, and I laugh, but it is, our language matters. And you'll recall I had the opportunity to spend almost a year leading the deck during the darkest days of the pandemic. And it became so clear to me that we had to think of that space differently. We as a community call it behind the deck as if it's an alley. And you get out on the water or look at it from Park Point, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the city's front yard. I mean, where else would you have this prime waterfront real estate and you'd think of it as an alley? So that was when we really started to revision what that could and should be. And so, now in this role, the seawall work will be important for that cruise ship connection. I think we had 11 port calls last year, so significant. Some were stopping in Duluth, some were beginning and ending their trips in Duluth, so that also meant airport travel, helpful too. But also this public amenity that connects Canal Park to the aquarium, to Bayfront, down to Pier B, past that to Lot D, and then eventually also to the craft district. So we start to connect all of these different assets. And, as you just said, this is something we love as people who live here, but it's also really appealing to our visitors. So, along with the seawall work, we're redesigning that space, that deck waterfront space, to have much more green space, to be much more appealing to people that are using their feet instead of driving, including potentially seasonal closure so that it can actually be more of a plaza where you can have food trucks and music and have a space that you hang out in. Because I really saw in my time at the deck, a space right now that's dominated by cars and not by people. Frankly, in many cases, kind of unsafe for pedestrians because of speed of vehicle travel back there and condition of the assets. So I'm really excited. We're close to that. We should have an unveiling of what that space is going to look like sometime within the next few months.
And, people that have come into town not realizing that there are ocean-like cruise ships that are coming to Duluth. And I've heard multiple comments when I've been in the Canal Park waterfront district from people, wow, I can't believe that big ship is here.
I live on the hillside, so it's been fun, especially when a ship arrives at sunrise to, see one of those cruise ships come through the bridge. And I think, again, it's a great reminder that we are an international port of call.
Right. Now, we are kind of reaching the end of our discussion today, but looking ahead, do you have some, let's call them New Year's resolutions for the city of Duluth?
For the city, it really is about, those three issues that will continue to be our themes: the effective and efficient core city services at a tax rate we can afford and sustain, our housing across all income levels so we can reach our population goal, and growing our commercial tax base so we can make investments without having to have significant property tax increases. That overarching theme of regional, I am passionate about where is the opportunity to partner with our near neighbors to do things collectively instead of each trying to do it from smaller tax bases. Acknowledging that we're going to have some challenges. Downtown continues to be a challenge. We haven't made the progress that I would like to have in the first year. Our budget's going to be a challenge. We need to afford all the compensation increases that we negotiated this year while still with the same tax base. So, I think in year two, I'm grateful for having been through year one, so I sort of know what the arc of a year looks like and kind of what that rhythm is. For me personally, I have one of my goals is I like to always say, secure your own oxygen mask before attempting to assist others. At times I think in the first year, the challenge and stress of the job really flowed through me to others that I'm asked to lead and partner with. And I was disappointed in myself for when that happened. So really prioritizing my own self-care this year, not letting my running routine fall away, which I did last year, my own spiritual grounding in the work that I do, my own mindfulness. All of those things are important for me to be able to not be an anxious leader so that the team that I work with can also feel confident and frankly enjoy the work they do. I think we're going to see public employees be under more pressure than they've been in the recent past. And so I want our team to know that they're cared about and supported and really enjoy their opportunity to not just work for this organization, but on behalf of our community.
And before we wrap up, I think, the last year and actually all of our experience shows that no one really knows what the future holds. Do you feel like, regardless of the challenges, the city is well positioned to handle any challenge it might face?
I really do, because I think we have a great leadership team. I'm very impressed in how, again, a collection of individuals, none of whom knew each other before, who took a minute to figure each other out, but who are really fabulous professionals in their work, have come together. It's fun to see the team form. One of our mantras as a team is to be unbothered. We know that we're in a political space, then sometimes the critiques can be sharp and the comments can be at times harsh, but we believe in the work that we're doing. We believe in this organization and in this community. I think we are so well positioned for the growth we want on the population side, for the growth we want on our tax base side. And again, we are sitting in this connection of transportation networks here at the head of the greatest of the Great Lakes, a place that people love to visit. And if we had more opportunities, would love to call home. So, I'm very bullish and optimistic about where we are as a community. Our goals are realistic, they are obtainable, and I'm excited to continue to work on them.
Well, you've been watching a conversation with Duluth Mayor Roger Reinert. Thanks for joining us. And Mayor and viewers,
Greg.
Happy New Year.